But I love this nice little group we have here this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Beth Smell, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at the Chapman Museum. I recognize many of you don't. So, like I said, very grateful that so many of you could join us this afternoon. Tonight, we are very fortunate to hear from Howard Kirschenbaum. Howard is known for his leadership in historic preservation in the Adirondack region. Not really known for art collecting, however. He acquired a major collection of early 1900s hand-colored photographs of James W. Mann, and he began researching the life and work of this accomplished yet little-known Adirondack photographer and colorist. So Howard has been a leader in historic preservation in the Adirondacks since the 1970s. He was instrumental in the preservation of Great Camp Sagamore, Uncas, the White Pine Camp, and other historic places. And he has written books on many of these camps. He is the founder, first president, and a longtime board member of the Adirondack Architectural Heritage and the Historic Preservation Organization for the Adirondack. So now I'm going to step aside and let you have your presentation. Photographs of James.
Thank you, right there. Well, thanks for the invitation to come, and I hope that you'll enjoy the little bit of information I can share with you about this interesting character from Glens Falls. It's a real local, and his work is set in this location. Before I begin, how many of you have seen the exhibit of the Mann photographs right next door? Just look at the other side of the wall here. Okay, so for some, I'll introduce it, and then you can move next door and see it afterwards. And for others, this will be kind of reflecting on what you've seen. You know, I was struck myself when I went into the room and saw them all together. In their actual sizes, some of the pictures included in my slides don't do it justice because I'm not a professional photographer, and I was using my iPhone on framed photographs that were under glass, so they're reflected and all. So do step next door and take a look at them if you haven't had a chance to do that after. So as Rebecca said, my work has not been in art history, but rather in history and historic preservation. And she mentioned some of the projects I've been involved with over the last 50 years or so at Great Camp Sagamore and Racket Lake and Camp Uncas, J.P. Morgan Family Camp near Racket Lake, also Sagamore being a Vanderbilt family estate. And some of you may have been to some of the places, Camp Santanoni in the Newcomb area, owned by New York State land. And it's a long campaign to try to save these buildings from being torn down. White Pine Camp in the northern Adirondacks near Paul Smith's, where instead Mike and his family just spent some time earlier. White Pine with its unusual architecture, the roof lines, and the kind of a different sort of rustic. And there's the connection, though, to my historic preservation career and James Mann's photographs came through this woman, Marilyn Mann Witt, or Lynn Witt, as she's known. Because when I got involved in White Pine Camp, I knew Marilyn, I knew Linwood because she was the manager, the innkeeper for the Stagecoach Inn in Lake Placid, which is the oldest inn in Lake Placid. I think it goes back to 1842. And when I had taken groups on tours of the Adirondack Great Camps, Lynn welcomed us to come see the Stagecoach Inn and a little snack and just a little extra treat on the trips. So when I got involved in White Pine Camp, I asked Lynn if she might be interested in coming over and taking charge of a bigger project. And so she became the innkeeper at White Pine Camp. And it was there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lynn's history because she's kind of instrumental to the story. The story is in some ways a bit of a detective story for how I learned about James Mann and his work. But initially, Lynn was born in 1940, and she grew up in the Syracuse and Lake Placid area. Her father was named James W. Mann, M-A-N-N. And he was a manager, an executive for the Sears Roebuck Company in the Syracuse area. So that was close to Lake Placid. He and his family spent here time in the Adirondacks. And her father bought a big old camp on Lake Placid called Gow, which they named Gowhurst. We think because their family came from England, there's a historic town named Gowhurst. And he owned this camp from 1976 to 1983. It was kind of not exactly Adirondack architecture, but more of a Tudor style, heavy beams and stucco, and a real fancy mansion kind of house on Lake Placid from its earlier days. And Lynn married a man named Bill Witt, W-I-T-T-E, and they lived in Wilmington and in Bloomingdale. And they were involved as ski company representatives, so skis and ski clothes. So Lake Placid was a good location for them. And during the 1980 Olympics, Lynn worked on the staff of the publicity department for the Olympics, and her father, I think, was working out. James Mann worked out on the mountain as a volunteer, and then afterwards, after the Olympics in the 80s, Lynn shifted over to the Stagecoach Inn, as I mentioned. And then when I started new operation for White Pine Camp, first as a museum and then as a small resort, I asked Lynn to join us, and so Lynn took up quarters in the back of the original dining room building at White Pine Camp. And you can see the unusual roof lines and windows that were, it's kind of a pre-modern architectural style at White Pine Camp. And then when we opened it, we had 13 rental units open to the public. And Lynn was in charge of that for about 15 years. And as part of what she did, in the dining room, or the great room now, but originally it was the dining room, the family came together at the camp. She hung on the walls about 6 to 8 photographs that she explained her father had taken the black and white photograph and hand colored it with to give it another dimension. So on the walls in the great room there, for a number of years, hung few examples of the work of J.W. Mann. And he gave titles to most of his paintings, and almost all of them are recognizable as, unless it says country road, something generic like that. He wouldn't just say lake, he would say Lake George or Lake Champlain, so on. And I didn't tune into it much at the time. They were interesting, they were lovely, but I was too busy with other things, and I don't even recall to this day ever spending more than 3 minutes glancing at them and put it out of my mind. But she wanted to share it. She indicated there were more. This is my favorite of all of them. She indicated that she had more that these were passed down to her, given to her from her father, but that she would hunt in antique stores and or yard sales, and if she saw anything J.W. Mann, she would purchase it. So she had a collection. I don't know how big a collection, but she had some. And she even, as the years went on, she even started to think, what am I going to do with all these photographs of my father had done? And she offered them to some of the owners of White Pine Camp, and some were sold. And she still had quite a bit. And she left White Pine Camp in 2009. She started to have some health matters and died in 2011. And so she had become a good friend over the years, working for me or working with me, as a real labor of love on this property in White Pine Camp. And so when I heard just by accident, one day I was in the area and I heard that she was having an estate sale. And I easily could have missed it, but the timing was right. I went over there to her little house in Bloomingdale. And sure enough, on it spread out on the table were a whole larger group than I'd ever seen of these photographs. Some of them were framed, like you see here. They were all signed, titled in the Adirondacks, Mountain Road, and some of them were just unframed, just on mats like that. And one of the real pièces de résistance of the collection was there was a photograph of this man, pardon the pun, who was right in front of our very eyes, was creating the hand-colored black and white photographs that were all around there, in the studio in Glens Falls. And on the backside of this photograph was written James Mann, so James W. Mann. So this is wonderful to have the artist at work. But I was discouraged to see them all sitting there, $15, $20. I started looking at them more closely. I really liked some of them. I really liked others. I didn't nice enough, but we all have our favorite images when we see a group of paintings. And I thought to myself, this would be such a shame to see these scattered for people who didn't know Lynn or didn't know anything about her family. And so I just made an offer for all got all that was available. And not being entirely sure what I was going to do with it. Because I'm not an art collector per se. I've got my share of things on the walls, but it's just not as a serious endeavor. And I quickly clarified in my mind. I mean, I didn't have this in mind when I bought it, but I quickly started thinking about it. Said, well, there are three things I'd like to do. One is I'd like to learn about James Mann and write an article for Adirondack Life magazine about him. And Adirondack Life prides itself on beautiful photography, and thought having 5 or 6 of his images and fill up the page, because the images actually, as you see next door, some of them they're pretty small. Some of them are like 3 inches wide, 7 inches high or something, and some even smaller, some a little bit bigger. So an article in Adirondack Life they could print the whole thing full size and do a really nice spread. And so I thought, well, that seems realistic. I'll do that. And then I thought it would be nice to get them all framed somewhat similarly and have an exhibit that where you can kind of appreciate the scope of the work. And so that became a plan. And then as to what I do with them after that, I really wasn't sure. But I just wanted to keep the collection together, whatever I did, whether I donated it to a museum or sold them to a collector, or I wanted to keep it together. So I became the happy owner of this collection, and put it in a box, put it in my attic. And 10 years later, finally got to doing something with it that I had planned to do. And the reason why it took me so long was I knew virtually nothing about James Mann. And how can you write an article about it and say, well, there's this guy who did some paintings and here they are. So I made some attempts. Lynn had a friend named Kathy Kane, who I knew, who came to White Pine Camp occasionally, so I knew her. Now I hadn't seen her for 5 or 10 or 15 years, but I thought if I could find out Kathy, Lynn's best friend, Kathy would know something about Lynn's family and Lynn's father. So, but I don't know how you spell Kathy Kane, you know, if I asked you how would you spell it, we'd probably get 8 different versions of C's and K's and Y's and IE's and. So I Googled it and I made a couple of calls and nothing came of it and I put it back, went back, put it on the shelf. Again, and I don't know how long that would have lasted of me not getting to it. But then I got lucky. And I ran into Sally Svensson, who I knew because I was associated with Adirondack Architectural Heritage, and she had published a book on churches of the Adirondacks for Adirondack Architectural Heritage being the publisher, and she had done another book on African Americans in the Adirondacks, and now here was a new book, and she was a cataloger. She would just research. She would find out every example and get the details down. And it was she didn't like write long narratives of stories, but it was like it became a catalog of everything you ever wanted to know about this photographer, that sort of thing. And Sally, I saw her at this event, and I told her what I was working on. And I said, in fact, you might be able to help me. Did you ever hear of a photographer in the Adirondacks named James W. Mann? She said, yeah, he's one of my people in my forthcoming book. I wrote a few paragraphs about him. I'll be happy to send it to you. So within 24 hours, true to her word, this is what she sent me. And James W., 1871 to 1940. Active Warren and Clinton counties, 1920 to 23. Photography was a short-term sideline for Mann. We'll go back to it, Mann. Born the son of a carpenter in Medford, Massachusetts. He was enumerated as a Medford wood turner in the 1900 census, but by 1903 had relocated to Glens Falls, Warren County, where he was a window trimmer for the B.B. Fowler's department store. See some heads nodding. You got that B.B. Fowler department store still exists.
Building.
The building, yeah. He did well at Fowler's, winning first prize in 1906 against 216 competitors in the annual contest sponsored by the Merchants Record and Show Window for, quote, the most attractive designs in window dressing, end of quote. He remained with the store through at least 1930, advancing to buyer and department manager. Mann's, quote, attractive display of hand-colored photos received compliments at the 1921 Industrial Exposition of Warren and Washington counties at the Glens Falls Armory. In 1922 and 23, he sold hand-painted mounted landscape photographs of local scenery and Christmas novelties from his sister's home in Plattsburgh. He also produced the occasional real photo postcard. So that was great. Whether that was quite enough information for an article, I wasn't quite sure, but it sure got me started. And so then I got serious and said, okay, now I don't have any more excuses. I gotta get to work on this and do it one way or another. And so I got to search for Kathy Kane again. And I must have called 10 numbers who didn't answer or who never heard of her. And then finally once I said, this is the Kathy Kane who? And it was, oh, Howie, yeah, sure. Nice to hear from you. So we finally got to learn a little bit more about her. And one of the things about her relationship with Lynn and Lynn's father, but one of the things that was troubling me right from the start, as soon as Sally Svensson sent me the information on when James Mann worked, was that it didn't seem like it could be her father. Because if James Mann, as it turned out, was born in 1912, and he was selling these novelties and doing this work in 1920, I was at 8 years old. It doesn't seem likely. So the hypothesis immediately presented itself that maybe this was Lynn's grandfather, even though, like, how could she be wrong about this, but. And I talked to two other people, who heard Lynn describe these as her father's work. So I needed to find out more about it. And one of the things that Kathy remembered was about Goudhurst that got me toward finding those photograph images. But she didn't remember whether it was Lynn's father or grandfather who did the work. She remembered the photographs, the whole room at Goudhurst filled with those photographs on the wall. So it was definitely Mann photographs there, but whether it was the fathers or the grandfather, she couldn't say for sure. I talked to Roby Politi, who was the mayor of Lake Placid for some years and a real estate broker, and he would know of, and he knew of James Mann, but never heard him described as Lynn's father, never heard him described as a photographer or not an artist. I found this great photograph, historical photograph of a James Mann and Maud Wood Park together. She was a well-known suffragette, and I asked Kathy, was James Mann ever associated with women's suffrage? And I mean, that's historical angle, but no, as far as Kathy knew, nothing like that. Then I found out that this James Mann was a congressman from Long Island that had nothing to do with the Adirondacks. And I worked on the genealogy a little bit, and these were some of the photos at the estate sale. Oh, I'm hitting it back. No wonder about that. So when I learned about the genealogy, we found out, okay, there was a James Witcher Mann, James W. Mann, JW, who lived from 1871 to 1940, married Christina Clark. So that was Lynn's grandfather. And they had 4 children, Mildred, William, Grace, and James. James, the dates, clearly that was Lynn's father. So the question really became, it became obvious that the photographer of some of these early photographs that were hand colored, that was the grandfather's work. But did the son inherit an interest in it and do it as a sideline himself? And found no evidence of that. All the evidence pointed to that simply Lynn got it wrong as a grandfather. And one of the pieces of evidence was that the Chapman Museum here received a donation of 3 Mann photographs from a gentleman out in California, I think, who was the grandson of Grace Elizabeth Mann. So that, the picture is starting to fall into place. The grandfather passes on some of it, gives to his children some of his photographs. So Grace Elizabeth Mann got some photographs, and her grandson that eventually gave them to the museum here. James Mann got some photographs, which he put on the walls of his Lake Placid home, and passed to his daughter, who put them on the walls of the Stagecoach Inn in White Pine Camp, and I got them at the estate sale. It all started to hang together, and then even additional pieces started to come in. One of the things he did was had this little label, this little trademark, and he put them on his the back side of everything he sold. So from time to time, you see these labels. And here there was a label on the backside of this item that Sally Svensson a year later came into possession of and shared with me. This was it's like a pad, a little pad of I just know the front side of it. I don't know if each page in the pad had an additional photograph on it or not. Or if this was just a decorative front cover, probably that. But on the back of it was this label from James W. Mann, Glens Falls. And he described his work as hand-colored photographs, postcards. We've seen lots of those postcards. I'm sure everyone's seen the historic. They kind of have a historic look to them. With I always felt that this hand coloring, the process, combined the preciseness of photography with the patina of art. Had a texture that a black and white photograph doesn't quite have, and so that was a popular form of the day. And folders, I'm not sure what folders meant, but maybe like that pad with and calendars. So you picture that's contemporary. The photograph calendars we see all the time. So it was the mystery was falling together. We're getting more information. We're learning from this previous one, 1910. That's pretty significant, showing his work was well established by 1910. And we know later we have newspaper articles that Sally unearthed that showed 1922. So he did work over at least 12, 15-year period, maybe longer, and obviously produced a good amount of work. And so the picture fell into place. I sent the article to Adirondack Life magazine, and they love the idea. It just fits right in with their style of doing a spread. Now, they apologized and said they had hoped to use a lot more of the photographs, but they had the space constraints, and so they were able to only do these 3 photographs. But they did we had a nice little article to share it. That was published last summer edition in Adirondack Life. And then the next goal was to have an exhibit. And so I went initially to the Tupper Lake Art Center where I have a summer campus near Tupper Lake, so I'm involved with them. And they were happy to mount an exhibit. Did most of the framing and set it up. And I got you see these 5 photographs. There was a triptych and 2 others. There's one other in the exhibit that I borrowed from a friend of mine. One of the other owners at White Pine Camp had bought some of those photos from Lynn in the earlier years, and he loaned them for the exhibit. So we had a nice last summer. We had a nice exhibit at Tupper Arts, and that was the first time I had really appreciated and seen them to get the most value out of seeing them together, nicely mounted, framed, consistent, and with good lighting. So I was very pleased with it, and very pleased that the Chapman Museum, through Nicole saw the value too, and it seemed especially appropriate to do it in Glens Falls. So 2 of the goals were achieved, to show them, to have published to show them, and the 3rd goal is still a little bit elusive, because I am clear that I don't want to break up the collection. Like, one of the options was to kind of do it in a gallery and put $100 on one and $75 on the other, and people could choose one they liked and walk away with them. That's fine, but I just didn't want to do that. And so at the present time, I'm procrastinating. Instead, I live in half the year up near Tupper Lake, Big Wolf Lake. The other half of the year in Rochester, New York, where I live in a historic bank building that was converted to 3 apartments on the 2nd floor. And the owner of the building lives in one apartment. They've become friends, and there's another rental in mine. And the hallway is big, looks like an exhibit space like this. except it doesn't have much on the walls. So I asked the landlord, on our floor that we share in common, the three of us, could I create a little gallery and put them there? And they said, that's a great idea. In fact, he was on the chairman of the board of the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester, so he's into that. And there are some sections of the hallway where they have their paintings. So this fit right in. So unless something else happens to change my mind, I'm gonna hang these in my apartment hallway and get to enjoy them year round. Every day when I bring to carry the groceries in, I'm gonna get a reminder of these Adirondack scenes. So I wish it's a lost art form. And here we are next door. So again, be sure to go next door if you haven't seen them and just spend a few minutes seeing them up close and personal. It's a lost art form. I'll show you the last few if just review the others that you haven't seen so far. I don't know exactly. I haven't studied the process to know, but I do believe that it's. He took the photographs, black and white photographs, developed the film. Not like Seneca Ray Stoddard, he didn't have to do it under a tent in the wilderness, but go back and develop the film studio. And then take the print and print the photograph. And then as we saw him in his studio, he used a combination of some watercolor and some oil, some pastels to create it. But I don't know exactly. I don't know if some of you are more expert on the photo technology of painting, of what kind of acrylics or paints would work for this process or not, because it seems like, well, like really in some cases it's shading, and in other cases it's a lot more detail to get each of those leaves, the yellow color on each leaf.
Two questions.
Yes.
The first is, do you know what type of camera he used? You know, if it was like,
Was there a camera in that?
prints
Let
are
me
so
go back and see if
small.
there's a camera in the photograph of Mann.
The prints are so small.
Yes, they are.
Most of the prints I see from those periods are much larger, like Stoddard's. The other question is,
So my answer is no to
most.
that. I don't.
Okay. The other question is, when you print, I have done some photography.
Mhm.
So when you print a black and white or any photograph, it's more there's like a sheen on it. There's a covering on the photograph. So I would imagine you'd have to do something to remove that shiny surface in order for the paints to stick to the photograph. That's, all I'm just guessing because it just made sense to me.
In high school, I used to have a little darkroom too, and I remember one of the choices was whether to get a glossy paper or a matte paper.
Maybe
And so a matte paper might have been more conducive to them being able to draw over it and
Mhm.
not have it slide off,
Yeah.
run and actually penetrate a little bit. The matte would penetrate.
That's a separate, that's a separate procedure to add the glossy on after, because Bentley developed, Harriet Bentley developed a color, coating for sort of the photograph. Yeah, I mean.
I have that text, so I do have to go, I just.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Say, I don't know like the chemical part of it,
Yeah.
but I do have one colored photograph as George Holster did for me. And so, I mean, it's an upset beating man of war in the 1919 San Francisco. I don't know if you've ever seen that. But his obviously started with an old glass plate photograph.
Mhm.
And I stood there and watched over his shoulder while he was just there with a paintbrush.
Was this in the Saratoga studio?
Yeah, he's in the downstairs studio on 5th Street. I hung out there for an afternoon with him.
That's funny. I lived in Saratoga for about 8 years in the 1970s, let's say. And I just spent a couple of days at Saratoga for the first time, and I went and I walked by what used to be his studio, and I remembered his studio. I remember being kind of charmed by this old timer who was using old time processes, and I was thinking to myself just the last few days, yeah, I wish he was alive and I could go in there and ask him some questions about this. And did he know James Mann? You know, he probably did, but I remember him working there myself. Yeah, feel free to go. And thanks to everybody. I appreciate your attention and the opportunity to share what an artist's work I've become very fond of. Thank you.